You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today I'm going to kind of wrap up looking back at this past Pacers miserable season. I've done a lot of various evaluations of the team's defense, clutch play, whatever you name it from this past year. Before I really pivot into off-season stuff, next Monday is the first draft profile coming on the Locked On Pacers podcast. I want to talk about Rick Carlisle, his first season with the team, hired as the head coach. A lot went on in his first year with the franchise, and no one better to do that with than Kevin Bowen from ESPN and the ESPN 1070 The Fan, the morning show covering the Colts over there as well. And Kevin, I learned that I am failing podcasting class because I always ask guests, how are you? And I'm not supposed to do that. So Kevin, are you psyched for the NFL draft? I'm learning to do sports questions.
I am psyched, yes. Honestly, and I think you are anti this, but you know how the drafts are for a lot of sports fans. That's like Christmas. So it is Christmas for Colts fans, albeit they don't have the ultimate gift being a first-round pick. Certainly the Pacers have the opposite of that, and hopefully for their sake, the ping pong balls will bounce their way. But, yes, I am intrigued because, you know, in my lifetime, it's the first time ever Colts and Pacers missed the playoffs in the same year. So to start a rebuild, reload, whatever you want to call it, I am excited.
Wow, I did not know that about the Pacers and Colts. This is an interesting time for the city.
Yeah.
I guess with Peyton being so good for so long and Reggie right before that, I never really considered that. That's interesting.
I know, it's kind of wild.
So looking back, speaking of Reggie, Rick Carlisle was the coach of those teams for a while. Rick Carlisle returns to the Pacers this year. It was his first year coaching the team. And I have some references I want to bring up later in the show because I actually watched a Chad Buchanan interview from Summer League in prep for this pod. That's how much I wanted to get into the weeds on the Carlisle hire. But before I talk about what Chad Buchanan said about the hire, in that, Kevin, just high-level overview stuff. What did you think of Rick Carlisle's first season coaching the Pacers?
Well, certainly disappointing. I think you got to start there. And, you know, yes, you know, the cards he was dealt were not the hand that I think he thought, mostly injury-related. And I think you could probably echo something similar for Nate Bjorkgren the year before. Probably a little bit more COVID impact. Granted, COVID did impact parts of this season as well. But I guess I was disappointed in just the fact that the record speaks for itself. And I get it. A lot of end-of-game situation is, do you have the horses or do you not in those end-of-game moments? But at the same time, I think with how timeout structure works in the NBA and the ability to draw up a lot of sets and really come from that point of view, not as kind of free-flowing in the final minute of the game, I do think, you know, if you have a great tactician, a great X and O guy, a great, you know, out-of-timeout guy, on both ends of the floor, that can really help you in those areas. And I felt like, just given the Pacers' record in those games, 4 points or less, it's hard to say that they had an advantage there. Again, I fully acknowledge that the guys who are getting the ball late in games at times, you're kind of like, wait, what? Or who? Would probably be the better thing to say. So, all in all, you know, I feel like he commanded some respect in the locker room. That clearly wasn't there last year. So that was a step in the right direction. But I think when you evaluate Rick Carlisle in the last 5 to 8 years, you got to admit that the team's success, mostly getting deep into the playoffs, hasn't been there. Again, personnel, you know, we can argue how built those Mavs teams were for that, but I think that remains the question here in Indiana. It's obviously getting a team that can be built to make the postseason and then eventually winning some games and winning some playoff series, which not something this franchise has done in quite a while.
The late game stuff is really interesting because a lot of the pegs for Carlisle's like great coaching resume, and Chad Buchanan brought this up in this interview that I have now referenced twice, is that, you know, something Carlisle is good at is he will maximize the talent he has on the team, right? He will put them all in the right situations to be great players. He will adapt the roster and maximize it, right? And a lot of times that did happen, I think. But in the end of games, the opposite of that happens where they fall apart on defense. They were horrible on defense at the end of games. And their offense, they didn't have a guy. You mentioned that the who was troubling, and that's not on his fault. But they still did not. You know, very rarely did they get buckets down the stretch. And 3 of their 4 wins in those games won by 4 or less were against lottery teams, right? So when they needed to step up, that's when he wasn't as good at the thing that he is clearly good at for most of the game. Like, they got into the clutch situation, they just couldn't finish it. So that is a big factor, and I think that's fascinating, especially when that's billed as something he's good at. And in the past, the Mavs haven't been necessarily great in the clutch either, even with Luka. They were better than the Pacers were this past season, but not like amazing or world beaters or anything. So that's a fascinating like headliner for his season. Is like, yeah, he did pretty well, I think, at the thing he's built to be really good at, except for at the very, very end of games. And I'm curious why that difference is so stark.
Yeah, and again, it is players, not plays. I get that. You hear that phrase a lot, but I still think, with how the NBA works and, your ability to, again, set up stuff and advance the ball and all of that, I do think that's an element that kudos to the Pacers for getting in a lot of those opportunities. And you lamented this a whole lot throughout the year, just finishing those chances, could be a huge stark difference in how their record is and whatnot. And then on the defensive end, yes, Turner missed more time this year, and you would know better than I, but man, it just seems like the defense was just much, much worse than it was last year. And so I think that is something that you have to acknowledge as well. So, when you look at this pie, I said this before, I didn't feel like it was just this is a personnel problem, this is a coaching problem. Like, I didn't think all of a sudden like, oh, Carlisle's going to be hired and you're going to be golden. You got to make personnel tweaks as well. And I think, Carlisle has got to prove himself in facing something I don't think he quite realized would be this challenging when he took the gig.
Yeah, the defense, I'm kind of lost because, I can see they change stuff up every so often, but like the personnel they had when they were healthy was still the team Nate Bjorkgren had and a lot of the team that Nate McMillan had that was much better on defense, right? So like some of the guys just were worse, which was strange, but that you can't just go, oh, worse defenders now, whatever. Something was off on the end of the floor. Miles Turner talked about that at the end of the season, and it was, with evaluating defense from a coaching perspective, I really struggle with because, I don't know what every single day guys are being told to do or not do. I don't know what Lloyd Pierce or Rick Carlisle or whoever the individual skills coach is for each guy is saying, hey, work on turning your hips this way to guard this kind of action, or hey, you practice being one step higher on drop coverage if you're a big, or we got to get in the gaps a little more, like have your arms. Like, I don't know what they're saying, so I can see what they're doing wrong, but I don't know if they don't know how to do it, and either then they need to be coached to do it, or if they're not being told to do it, or how to marry up those gaps in my knowledge. So sometimes on both ends, it's kind of hard to say, oh, this is obviously a coaching problem versus a personnel problem, but there was an aspect to me of like, okay, they were much better with similar players, even last season on defense, and this year to see that completely change and fall apart went against the entire Pacer ethos, and like Nate Bjorkgren was killed for some of the stuff he chose to do on defense, and they were way better on defense according to the stats last year, right? So I have a lot of trouble evaluating that end of the floor and how the staff did because I don't know what they were saying to players, but that end of the floor was where I had the most level of concern with how things went in terms of a new staff applying stuff to new players.
Yeah, and again, Carlisle, by all accounts, did not have anywhere near the locker room dysfunction, for lack of a better term, than Bjorkgren did. But if Bjorkgren would have been the coach of this year's team and that record would have been produced and those defensive numbers would have been produced, you would have had 10,000 people getting ready to show up at his house to pack his bags right away. So I just think there is a level of, yes, I watch these teams in the playoffs and I see some long interchangeable wings and length that the Pacers, frankly, just don't have. But I want to make sure that we hold this coaching staff accountable. This is kind of a historic season. And yeah, the net ratings and stuff like that, maybe it wasn't, fifth worst team in the NBA. And I'm usually, I try to factor in context when looking at just kind of black and white sort of results. I think that's very important, and you do a tremendous job with that. But at the same time, whether the staff stays intact, which so far it looks like it will, not a lot of coaching turnover in the NBA, I feel like it is very important for that staff to make strides, have an impact, whatever, stick to core philosophies, employ that at a higher rate, have change-ups a little bit more. But clearly, in the game situations, the defensive end of the floor, probably the two biggest areas to react to next year.
Hey guys, one short little break here. Talk about two awesome groups of people. First up, the good folks over at TrueBill. Do you know why free trials renew without your consent? It's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download TrueBill to take control of your subscriptions. TrueBill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with TrueBill because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel. TrueBill makes it incredibly simple. Link your accounts and TrueBill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap, and your TrueBill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. They have over 2 million users and have helped them save over $100 million. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now, truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands a year. truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Let's also talk about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bars out there. Look, if you're like me, you've tried protein bars in the store before, and they aren't very good. They're rubbery, chalky, plasticky. They don't taste like food. They're like they just don't chew right. The texture doesn't make any sense. The flavor's not as good as it's advertised to be. Built Bar has solved that problem. 100% covered in chocolate protein bars that all come in so many good flavors. So many of them taste like a candy bar. The sweet ones all do. They also have some fruit ones that are a little bit healthier and taste exactly like the flavor says, and their texture sort of matches the flavor they have. So they're really delicious. They're exactly what you're looking for. And so many Locked On listeners have tried them and told me that they love them. And they have a puff variety that have marshmallows in them. There's just a million reasons to try them. And you should be next. Low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with them. They are better, and their macros are great. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein in most of them. They'll be blown away. You got to try them. I love the peanut butter brownie, and I think you will too. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. I have this on the discussion topic itinerary, and you just brought it up, so we'll just do it now. But in general, the staff going into next season, like I don't think anyone should lose their job for this year. Like it was a bananas year for the Pacers. Like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Yeah, they were horrible, and like in that guys, you would like to make changes. They just won 25 games, and they're not a franchise who likes to be bad, but. They haven't had the same coaching staff for 2 straight seasons since 2019. Like that is a pretty long time for something like that to happen. And so I think there is a lot of value in that, even if a lot of stuff didn't work this year. And I'm curious if that is like a too rosy way to you of looking at it, or if you feel like that makes sense.
No, I think that's totally fair. And it is difficult in the NFL versus the NBA. The NFL, like there are design coordinators that are very public. They
Right.
meet the media once a week. Like from a Colts standpoint, Frank Reich has called the plays, and now it'll be Gus Bradley, and before that it was Matt Eberflus. They both call the defensive plays, so it's like very obvious. Whereas the NBA, you don't have just that clarity in a public setting as much, nor do you hear from them as much as you do in the NFL. So I'm not saying that, and I assume we're going to have a decent amount. We'll see how much, but we're going to have some roster turnover here to factor in as well.
Right.
And again, COVID, hopefully will take another step forward, and any limitations you had during training camp last year should hopefully be done with. So all of those things, I think you have to factor in. So the Lloyd Pierce resume, the Ronald Norred resume, what's the other guy's name?
Mike Weinhardt, Jenny Bouchek.
Yeah. All the resumes are fine, and when they compiled that staff, I was pretty impressed by it. But I did feel like when Carlisle was hired, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but it's like, all right, the playoff wins were not there in Dallas from a series standpoint. And I want to say from a regular season standpoint, I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure this past year for Dallas was their best year from a win standpoint since the title year. Carlisle, but again, unbelievable resume, the Hall of Fame caliber coach, all of that. But I do think there is a level of this staff has got to prove himself a little bit more than I thought Carlisle got a pass at times this season, and his staff in general, based on name recognition.
Yeah, this was the Mavs' best season since the finals year. Their second time winning more than 50 games in a season. He had like the West was crazy like for a stretch in the early 2010s. And I only say it to say, like I brought this up with Nate McMillan a lot. Like everybody killed Nate McMillan for his postseason record, and with the Pacers, that was a big part of the reason he got fired. But like in Portland, a lot of Nate McMillan's postseason losses were like they were a 7 seed playing a 2 seed, or like they were a 6 seed playing a 3 seed. I think he only had one loss as the higher seed. And now with the Pacers, he had one too, and they got swept, and that was the last straw before he got fired. With Rick, there was, I think, 2 series with Dallas where he was the higher seed and lost. But most of those, for the last part of the decade, they were the worst team, like on paper. And so I always have trouble in my head of like, okay, they lost, but like, am I really going to kill him for losing that? Like, maybe they should have won one of the Clippers series the last 2 seasons he was there. I don't know, but they weren't like that awesome of a team either of those years. So that is a little that evaluation is always tough for me. But you're right that he has not won a series since that finals year, which is crazy to think about. And yet he's still thought of very highly in coaching circles, and his staff is really good. So I would be curious how they would look in a postseason setting, especially as this roster kind of transforms. Another factor for him I want to bring up. I've used this phrase on this podcast before, but it's like a college coach colloquialism usually. But they always say like, oh, when he gets his recruits, when he gets his guys, they'll be a better team that fit his system a little better. Or like he's not inheriting them from the old coaching regime, right? With Carlisle, who's a little more involved in front office stuff than old coaches, not like a lot or anything, but he's definitely more involved than old coaches, and who plays more of an offensive pace or an offensive style than old coaches who were built more for defense, like Vogel and McMillan. I do wonder if there is an aspect of, especially now that he will be here for the full offseason, if he is here for the full offseason. I guess I don't know anything there, but assuming he's here for the full offseason, if there is an element of, okay, if he is able to say, hey, I like these guys, and the Pacers get them, how much him having a team that makes sense in his image will make him look like a much better coach next year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up. I guess I go back to the Isiah Jackson draft pick. I mean, I remember listening to Rick that night. I'm sure you do as well, Tony. Like, oh my gosh, it sounded like he was talking about one of his sons, just with how,
right.
Obsessed and intrigued. And I mean, he wanted to get on the floor with them that night. And it was like, there's so much clay to mold here. And, without knowing certainly the whispers or what was happening in that draft room, it almost seems like they traded up purely to appease Carlisle. And I mean, who knows? Kevin Pritchard easily could have loved, Isiah Jackson for similar reasons that Rick clearly does. But I do feel like there's a good bit of truth to what you say. And I think that's important. And it's important that Rick Carlisle, I think, has say. I think, so many times during drafts, Tony, regardless of sport, you see a player drafted and they turn into, good or bad, that pick, and we blame or praise the general manager or the team president for that. And how many times do we forget that, like, putting them in the right environment and coaching is a massive part of it? Player development is so important, and the right atmosphere is so important. Like, to me, Jalen Smith is the perfect example of that. When Jalen Smith was drafted to Phoenix, they were in the midst of a serious rebuild and like full on with that. And then boom, that rookie season of his, everything starts to turn for him. And all of a sudden, wow, boy, Jalen Smith getting all those minutes. Like, Jalen Smith played at a really high level in the Big Ten. It's not like he was he wasn't Isiah Jackson project like coming out. So all of a sudden, Jalen Smith, changes scenery and the opportunities there. And without even knowing his system and getting traded midseason, look at the numbers that he put up. So I do think there is a lot of just starting to put more of the pieces together that you want, that you desire, that you've handpicked to a lesser degree. All of those things are really important. And I do think you need to have a level of patience with that as well. I know it's easy for me to say, and I get how fandom works. You can be really disappointed in the season, but at the same time, I look at this and think to myself, all right, with the right tweaks, you can be a playoff team next year. And then I think after that, you're hopefully somewhat of a contender in the East. Maybe not at the top tier, but you are getting to the point where you take steps as a franchise, which I think is really important. Memphis right now, it's not like they just became that number 2 seed. Like, there were steps in their process, and I think the Pacers need to, now of this kind of being the rock bottom of the rebuild, next year build a little bit more onto that and start feeling what, winning ways are all about. Because, and I know I'm running a little bit long on this answer, but it just kind of popped in my head. Like, Tyrese Halliburton, didn't really win at Iowa State, at least to the level that, maybe some, college basketball players win at. And in Sacramento, he certainly didn't win. I am not blaming him for one bit for that. But what I'm saying is, there is an element of like learning how to win. There is an element of having the ball late in games feeling that, wanting it, and succeeding in those environments. This Pacers team and their personnel need to feel that in more ways next year, because I don't think it's just, boom, you go from 0 to 180. I think there is, or I guess 0 to 90, I should say, there is a little bit more of a, stepping stone process.
One more break here, guys, so I can talk about the good folks over at betonline.net, your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season over at betonline.net. They got the Friday lines up for the NBA playoffs. Bucks, after a loss, favored by 2.5 in Chicago. No Chris Middleton. I don't know who's going to win that game, but that's going to be a fascinating game for the future of that series and for really both of those teams. I'm really looking forward to that game. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. They've got it all. Head over to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yeah, to your point about development and being in the right situation, like I know, like Tyreek Evans, a former Pacer, like Paul Westphal was like his favorite coach, like with the Kings, and he said like, oh, Noah, he thought that was the coach that used him the best, right? And like for a lot of young players, that can be really important, is that you have the right coach to set you up for situations like that and to apply it to Carlisle and the Pacers directly. I would say, feel free to push back on this, or anyone listening, feel free to disagree, but obviously Jalen Smith played the best basketball of his career after being traded to the Pacers in a better situation. Buddy Hield played the best basketball of his career after being traded to the Pacers this season and being put in a better situation. And Tyrese Halliburton, again, very short career for him and Jalen Smith, but played the best basketball of his career after being traded to the Pacers in a better situation. So while the pieces around those guys, not great, the win-loss with those guys here, 6-22, again, not very good. Like it's not rocket science. Like they were a young team, they were not good. But those guys all played better. And so that kind of, to me, as Rick Carlisle was alluding to around the trade deadline, we wanted more shooting, we wanted to be a little faster, all those things. They get those guys that he likes, and boom, he puts them in the spots to succeed and develop, and the team looks like they have better players. With more time to do that, I think that would be good for him and the Pacers. And that's why I think this offseason of him getting his own guys, I don't want to use that phrase too much, but that idea and him being with the team the whole offseason instead of part of it, because they fired Bjorkgren after like 3 weeks. Remember, it was a long time last year. That I think that's going to be really valuable. The last thing I want to bring up here, I was watching this again, Chad Buchanan interview, 2.5 minutes long, and I'm seeping this for all the quotes. Chad Buchanan says, we didn't bring in Rick Carlisle to try to build for the future, and said that winning now is a priority, which is hilarious to look back on after they win 25 games. But do you feel like Rick can take this team from this sunken season back to success? Because with the Mavs, it took them 2 years to do it. They went 24 wins, 33 wins, 49, right? Can Rick do that with the Pacers any faster and in any sort of different way than what has been seen before, both for him in history and in all of NBA history, really?
Man, that's such a great question. I'd love to walk out on a ledge and give you a real answer, but it's you got to match personnel. This is such a multi-layered thing, and that's why when I felt like the firing of Bjorkgren, or the firing of McMillan, I should say, to Bjorkgren was more of a, again, I believe in the personnel, the coach just has to change. Well, then they tried that again. I believe in the personnel, the coach just has to change. And then finally, it was admitted that, all right, what I put in the cupboard is not exactly what you need from an ingredient standpoint to build what you want to. So, I think so. There are some pieces that I really, really like that if we would have had this conversation, Tony, even back like January 1, I don't know if I would have said that. So I think you've taken important steps in the right direction with a few of those pieces already. And I know you and I, had a little back and forth a couple nights ago, just how important this offseason is. Like, I can't stress enough how important that single-digit pick is. And then obviously whatever you end up doing with a Brogdon, with a Turner, with a Hield, certainly if somehow 31 overall can turn into, one of these second round picks that you hear about. I'm not saying it's got to be Fred VanVleet or, whatever, but if you can get something out of that, I think that is so massive for you as well. Then I think you have the ability to really challenge. But, having said that, I mean, this is not my older brother's Eastern Conference. This is a pretty good East. And I think there are some really good teams there. And I mentioned it on our morning show. I guess it was today, and we're recording this on Thursday. Of now with the Bulls winning, and evening up that series. If you look at the NBA as a whole, 26 of the 30 teams have won a playoff game since the Pacers last did.
Wow.
It's kind of jarring, that you're in a group with Sacramento and Detroit, and I think it's Orlando,
Charlotte
maybe,
and
Charlotte. Indiana's one of them. Charlotte, Detroit, Sacramento. Those are the four.
Wow.
Orlando has won a playoff game. Yeah, it's crazy, and
I didn't know that.
I don't think it's to that extent to go back to the playoff series, but it is a big number if you went back playoff series, which you obviously would go back a few more years. But again, what I'm getting at is this franchise is in a very foreign place. As a fan base or as people that cover it, it's a very foreign place. So you've got to get back to establishing a culture of winning because, frankly, that's lost. And your longest tenured player is, who? Goga? It's kind of a weird Brogdon. It's kind of a
Miles
weird
Turner's
position.
being erased from your brain.
Turner, God, jeez, major apologies on that. Super brain fade there because I actually think they should.
Goga is second though.
Bring back Turner. So what I'm getting at again is just this is a foundation that you really are starting from the bottom. Carlisle's track record, there's things you can point to that you really, really like, but a resume of 2010 and prior, I just don't know if it's apples to apples to exactly what he's dealing with here in 2022. And he had Luka. Granted, Luka, had it was not like he was immediate MVP level. I mean, he got there pretty darn quick, but finding that sort of talent remains, a question that 25 franchises would love to find the answer to as well. So I wish I had more conviction one way or the other. I like the staff. On paper, it seems like a good staff. But at the same time, I don't think the name recognition of Rick Carlisle all of a sudden means that I can sit here and be like, oh, yeah, as long as you find the pieces, you are totally good. There's part of this that it's on them to prove themselves as well.
Yeah, I think they can get to be as good as the Hornets, who were the 10 seed this year because the East is actually crazy good now, right? So, No, I don't know that they can jump all the way to playoff level like where the Bulls are right now, who, again, just won a game. So it's tough. They've got a long road ahead from where they are. And I still think their staff is the right staff, though. I think they had – your word at the beginning, disappointing, was perfect, like way lower than expectations for the staff they brought in, and not the season that the Pacers or Herb Simon or Kevin Pritchard or Chad Buchanan or Rick Carlisle wanted to have. They thought that they could meld it with the roster they had, but that group was not a good fit and did not cut it. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to try it again with this staff, but a different team, see what those changes are this summer and try to figure it out. I did not – that stat about the wins in the playoffs is like blowing my mind. I'm still thinking about it while I'm actively talking.
Yeah.
That is
so
something.
It's 9 straight losses because swept by Boston and
Miami.
Cleveland?
Yeah.
Boston, Miami being the bubble, and then lost the 7th game of that Cleveland series.
Wow.
So that would be the 9 straight, and yeah, it's just wild. And I know you and I have had various conversations, Tony, over the months this year, and I think in the preseason we did one of these, and I said to you, outside of wins and losses, the most important answer on this season is, to me, the Sabonis-Turner debate, and just in general, the ripple effect of that, which is, do you have the right roster construction? And the fact that you got an answer to that, you started on the new answer to that, to me, is vitally important, and things are headed in the right direction. Do they stay in the right direction? A lot of stuff remains to be seen, but I do think getting an answer, starting the new answer, i.e. Halliburton, vital for the franchise, and the single-digit pick certainly helps.
Vital offseason, as Kevin Bowen said on Twitter, in his life, in your opinion, the most important offseason for the Pacers. And that, for a lot of people, that is a common sentiment. Despite my disagreement, I do not belittle anyone for thinking that. This is their first time with a top 10 pick in forever, and a chance for Rick Carlisle.
Sounds like
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Tony, it sounds like a Kevin Harlan call. In my life! There's a horrible Kevin Harlan impression there, but it sounds dramatic, but I'm going to stand by it. You did make some good points. You did challenge my thinking, which I greatly appreciated, but I do think we are there, and no matter what, I just think it's an exciting time to be a fan, and that's not something I would have said really prior to, I don't know, 2017-18 offseason.
I might have overrated Vic a little, but I thought that's 2018 offseason was enormous for the Pacers, and I liked what they did at the time. And in retrospect, you know what? That did not work out very well. Kevin, thank you very much for the time. I'm 3 minutes over the time I have allotted for you, so I apologize for that. What do you got coming from the Colts and Pacers and morning show pipeline for everybody to know about?
Well, yes, we have the NFL draft next week, so kind of all eyes on that, and then start to look towards Colts offseason program. NFL schedule will be released in early May, and then the lottery balls, and start looking at Pacers draft. And really looking forward to that because where they are slotted and how you handle those things will be widely debated. So I can't wait. Again, exciting is how I look at it. So it should be fun times, which you don't usually say or don't maybe often say about the off season. But I'm looking forward to it. And as always, man, I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you very much for the time. Kevin is tweeting a lot about the Boston Celtics these days because they have a forward named Matt Ryan, and I'm assuming that's who you're talking about all the time when you say that.
Wait, is that the Notre Dame guy?
It is the Notre Dame guy. He is on the Celtics. Yeah.
Gosh, so he transferred to Vanderbilt. Man, sharpshooter.
He actually transferred from Vandy to Chattanooga too, and then made it to the NBA.
Did he really?
Yes, he's been all over.
That's a great story.
But not actually. If you want more Colts coverage, radio coverage, Pacers coverage, whatever, Kevin's got it for you at KBowen1070 on Twitter. This show is at Locked On Pacers and me at TEastNBA. We'll be back next week with our first prospect breakdown. If you made it this far, you get to know it's going to be Jabari Smith. You're going to want to listen to it. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you on Monday.